spooky.
Horror movies. I love horror movies. Last year was a pretty weak year overall for movies, but there were a couple really good horror films. Evil Dead Rise and Talk to Me immediately come to mind. Now, this past weekend saw the release of Imaginary from horror studio Blumhouse. It's one of the first horror films of this year. Now, I will admit it's kind of a hit or miss genre, mostly because they're generally really inexpensive to make. Now, I'm not saying that you cannot get an excellent movie with a low budget, but sometimes, well, what you get is a low budget film. So, what do we have here? Is Imaginary a horror movie that lives up to some of the great ones from last year? Or is this just a forgettable horror movie destined to be forgotten? Well, before we answer that, let's talk a little bit about the plot to the movie Imaginary.
Let's talk.
So here we find Jessica, a recently married woman who has become stepmom to two young girls. She and her new family move into her childhood home after her father had to be placed in an assisted living facility. When Jessica returns to her childhood home with her family, she finds her old teddy bear Chauncey and sees that her youngest stepdaughter Alice has grown attached to it. Now, after Alice's behavior becomes concerning and the games that she and Chauncey play turn increasingly sinister, Jessica starts realizing that Chauncey is much more than a stuffed bear that she believed him to be for all these years. Now, Chauncey convinces young Alice to open a door to an alternate dimension called the Never Ever. So, now in search of Alice, Jessica, her other stepdaughter Taylor, along with neighbor Gloria, who has known Jessica since she was a child, go into the Never Ever to retrieve Alice. So let's first talk about the acting. As with many of these low-budget horror movies, you're not getting many recognizable people. But I'll give them credit. They do a pretty decent job with this. Jessica is played by actress DeWanda Wise, who has pretty much been a character actor her career so far. But she does a solid job as the lead in this movie. She conveys her fear and growing dread while never overacting like we sometimes see in these types of films. Now, the only other person you may recognize is Betty Buckley, who plays the old neighbor Gloria. So when I saw her, I thought she looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. If you go into her acting career, however, you will see that she's actually won a Tony Award back in '83 and has been regularly working in theater, film, and television since way back in the late '60s. Her list of credits is fairly extensive, and she's been in some of the better TV shows over the year. She does a good job also in this film with the script that she is given.
Good job.
Now for the movie itself. Now, I find the best horror movies are the ones they just have a straightforward story. You might get a couple twists and turns, but in general, the narrative is really straightforward with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Imaginary, however, tries to go in a little bit of a different direction, a little bit beyond that. It kind of winds up giving you too many twists and turns, and like plot points that really don't lead anywhere. Now, there are some really scary and sinister moments, especially with Chauncey, the bear character. And some of the reveals are a bit frightening, but it's a PG-13 movie, so we don't get that hardcore horror that we would really like to see, the ones we've gotten in some other movies that were rated R. I was kind of hoping we would get like another sinister toy film, like Megan from last year, or even like Chucky from back in the day. And the movie does present itself as that. But without spoiling it, it doesn't go in that direction, and I think it's weaker for it.
It's weak.
So I think Imaginary was trying to be more than your straightforward, scary, toy horror story. And unfortunately, it kind of falls a little short because of that. Now, that's not to say you can't find enjoyment in this film, because there are some good horror moments sprinkled throughout the movie. So, though it lacks some of the finesse of the top-tier Blumhouse films, Imaginary is fun. It's slightly silly horror. It holds your attention and holds your enjoyment. It has a few too many twists, and despite its fun concept, it falls a bit short due to an overcrowded narrative. It has too many competing storylines that kind of like take up the spotlight. It lacks focus, does try to pull itself together at the end, but it just goes in so many directions that it gets a little muddled. So I don't think it's good enough to be considered a great horror movie. I would say that it's a fairly decent one, and the acting's pretty good. Some of the jump scares are definitely worth your time. So if you're home one night, definitely check it out. It's not worth going to the theater to see.
Whatever.
Well, that's it for me this week. Tune in next week where I'll give you my thoughts on whatever I've seen in the past week. In the meantime, click that like button, subscribe, leave a comment or a suggestion, share this video with friends and enemies alike. And as always, thank you for giving me your valuable time, and I'll see you next week. Take care.